keep in mind that as I was in Citizens, I had left Citizens, and there was this interim space where I was now at Brown-Forman, and I had to continue. And I'm doing deals for Brown-Forman, flying back from Louisville, Kentucky, back to Connecticut, New York City, actually to do a deal for them. And I had to, on the side, hey, I got to meet with these three firms for StarCast to see if we can get this thing going before this internet bubble pops.
Yeah, there goes an alpha man. I mean, that's a great example of if you want, you have to do extraordinary things if you want extraordinary results. Welcome to this episode of Mission Control. This is your host, Ramon Peralta with Peralta Design, and we launch brands. I'm very excited today. I have one of my personal life heroes. Very few people that have that moniker. Would like us to welcome Mr. Kevin D. Patrick, the founder of Intellistra Financial Group. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ramon. It's great to be here, man. Looking forward to it. It's been a while. It's been a few months since I've seen you, but it's always good to see you, man. Always good to see you.
Yeah, we're so excited for the launch of Intellistra, and we can't wait to dive in. I also want to introduce the man on the soundboard, our director of web development, and employee number one. That's his moniker. The one and only Jorge Pezo Candelario.
Thank you. We're in the upper room because we're recording on Zoom.
Okay. Well, yeah, he's also a poet and he doesn't know it yet. So Kev, we're going to get right to the gold. I can't wait to dive in to hear your story. But first, I want to share with our listeners some of the topics. Today's episode is going to be about acquisitions and scaling and just, using private equity experiences for nonprofits. And I think a lot of people don't tend to think as nonprofits as to run them like for-profits. So I really want to dive into that, and that's been your background. I was flipping through your PDF here. That's like 6 pages available on your website, but it's just so many large purchases. I see a lot of B's on these numbers. You are the man, and just take us through some of these strategies that will be helpful for our listeners.
Well, I think the underlying strategy, if I had to give everyone a theme, it's called value creation, right? You have an asset, you have a business. Your job as an owner, as an employee, is to work towards making that business more valuable tomorrow than it is today. So you have to ask yourself, well, what are the things I need to do? Some organizations may say an acquisition is the right way to go. Some organizations may say, well, maybe it's a refinancing. But at the end of the day, again, the underlying theme is value creation. How do I create the value? And we can actually use that throughout our own lives, right? I mean, what do I do as Kevin Patrick to make myself more valuable tomorrow than I am today? Is that education? Is that more knowledge? Is that more networking? But it's a process where we grow ourselves to make ourselves more valuable, and that is the same holds true for assets.
Right. Now, as a finance and strategy business leader, somebody shows you their books. What are you looking at for those listeners out there? How should their books look? What's your kind of measuring stick for valuations when you're looking at companies or nonprofits?
Well, I'm looking for their ability to grow cash. I'm looking at how well they manage cash. I'm looking at whether or not they're over levered. Do they have too much debt? I'm looking at, well, if you have a lot of debt, what are you doing? Are you using the cost of that debt to create more value? In other words, if you have interest on debt and it's costing you, let's say 6 or 7%, which is pretty high, I guess, but you're earning 15%, well, okay, you're creating value. Well, that's a good thing. But there's an opportunity now to maybe take that debt level down a little bit, maybe get that interest expense down a little bit by renegotiating with your banks in order to make your value creation paradigm more productive. The other thing we look to do, what are the components of your revenue? We look at refining your business model. How are you growing your revenue? What's growing fast? What's growing slow? Are the slow growing pieces of your revenue are those things we can do away with? Should we focus only on the fast growing pieces of your revenue? I mean, there's just a myriad of type of possibilities that we can go through. We actually look at things in terms of when I look at EBITDA growth, I look at your EBITDA growth and your volatility of your EBITDA growth. Okay, so over time, it is a metric that we use that it looks at the strength of your EBITDA and the strength of your cash flow. So it's kind of going to a doctor's office. You know how a doctor pulls out charts and he's got everything that he looked at after your blood chart, after your blood work. Well, it's the same thing with a company. I'm going to visit you. I'm going to go through a series of things that you're doing. I'm going to propose to you some things that you can do better. And I'm going to show you that the economic impact of doing those things better and how that creates more value for you. Now, as an organization, you have to kind of assess whether or not it is the proper time for you to make those moves, right? You have to sit back and say, yeah, this makes sense to do. Or, yeah, maybe I don't want to do that right now. But you also have to understand the cost of waiting and the impact of waiting on your organization. Some organizations, my fear is that they wait too long. They'll wait till the recession hits. And by the way, we're going to have another recession. Okay, it's just going to happen. So my question is to everyone, well, what are the steps you should take now? What if you refine your business now when the recession hits? Aren't you in a better position to weather that storm? And that's what Intellistra is about. That's what my organization is about. We can go in because we've done this before. I've done it for big organizations. I've done it for small organizations. I've done it for a guy who was on TV years ago.
The Prophet.
The Prophet. And one of the things you do, you go into a business and you figure out how to make them run better, how to make them run more efficiently. And that's kind of the game plan. Now, from an acquisition perspective, why do an acquisition? Well, it's interesting because a few weeks ago, I found out that there were several nonprofits that were looking into acquisitions. And that struck me as a little weird because, I mean, man, you're a nonprofit. Well, I'm a nonprofit. You know, I shouldn't be dealing with acquisitions. I should be doing things for the good of the community. But that's exactly the point.
Or being focused on donations. I feel like nonprofits are like, they're always talking about donors, and where can we get more donors? But you're talking, when they talk acquisition, it's kind of the opposite.
It's the opposite of that.
They're going to spend money.
Yeah. So you have to ask your question. Well, you brought up a great point where you said, well, you know, as a nonprofit, you know, does it make sense to look at private equity? Well, if you're doing the things or look at business, you know, run like a business. Well, if you're doing things right now that business people normally do, why doesn't it make sense to look at how a business actually operates and imitate some of those things? That's the highest form of flattery. Well, yeah, you should imitate that. But, you know, if you're a nonprofit and you're looking at acquisitions, or you're a nonprofit and you're wanting to grow, there are certain things that private equity does, and they do it extremely well because they make a ton of money at it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not trying to say that, hey, look, forget your nonprofit mantra or your nonprofit mission. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you can use private equity to make your operation run better. You can refine your business model and help it to grow. And by the way, in helping your organization grow as a nonprofit.
Say that again, refine your business model?
Yeah, refine your business model. Okay. And basically that says, well, here are the mechanics of your business model. You do A and B and it generates C. Okay. Well, what if I can manipulate those blocks a little bit, the A block or the B block, and create more C for you? Well, that's a good thing, right? That means you're not going to donors as a nonprofit and, you know, hitting them on the head every year trying to get more money out of them, because at some point donors say no. They say, look, I've given enough, or I have other interests that I want to move to. Well, guess what? You know, you're not going to be able to squeeze more out of them. So that means you've got to look inward. You got to say, well, what do we do internally to make ourselves, again, more value? How do we create value inside? And that refining of the business blocks, the refining of the different pieces of your business is how you create the value that you need to. You still get donations, but this helps you to raise more cash flow. And that's an important aspect of, again, what Intellistra does. Now, we do that for small and medium-sized businesses. I've done this throughout my career. One job I was brought in to be a turnaround guy. And we had an organization, a nonprofit organization that was not doing that well. And so one of the first things I did was, first of all, get everybody to buy in on, hey, look, here's some metric we need to focus on. Secondly, we're going to have to do some refinancing. And third, we're going to have to improve our cash flow. Okay. And then the other thing I did was I brought in people. I brought in 2 other private equity people to kind of help me pull this organization together and get us back on the right track. 2, 3 years later, cash flow improves. We get the refinancing, and then COVID hits. But guess what? We were in a great situation when COVID hit because we had created an environment focused on refining the business model so that we could weather that storm. And so that was a very, very fortunate process that we engaged in early on to kind of help us weather the storm, be in a position to weather the storm.
Yeah, it was almost premonition or forecasting and being ready so you don't have to get ready.
Exactly.
The old adage holds true. And they say that a good captain either sails around the storm or right into it, but they don't let it hit them. So I like that you prepared yourself to be able to sail directly into it, knowing that you could weather it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea. I mean, it sounds almost disruptive in the nonprofit space to bring in the idea of bringing in private equity guys, because I think the stereotype anyway is that it's for a good cause. We're giving back. Our executive director, is a kind soul. It just doesn't have the cutthroat. When you think of private equity guys, it's like Men in Black are coming in with suitcases full of cash, and you're mixing those worlds. But I think you're. I mean, it's fascinating to me because it's like we don't typically think of that, and you're basically saying like you're running a business, whether it's nonprofit or not, it's a business.
It's an enterprise. You're running it. There's some economics associated with that enterprise. The economics are based on, whether we like it or not, money.
Right. Hello.
It's based on. By the way, as a nonprofit, if I earn more, I can accommodate my mission better.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean I'm going to go out and, okay, we got to fire 50,000 people. That's not typical private equity. Most private equity organizations don't go that route. What they prefer to do is figure out how to tweak here and there to create the value that's needed to make the organization more sustainable. I mean, that's what private equity is. Now, back in the leverage buyout days and all that type of stuff, where you had all the crazy stuff going on back in the 80s, there was a lot of that going on, but they weren't, obviously, no one's paying attention to nonprofits back then. They were just doing that as part of the barbarians at the gates sort of scenario.
But, we're going to leave it there because I want to come back. And when we come back, I want to learn all about young Kevin and how you got all into this and have since built this amazing company right after these words.
Are you a small to medium-sized business looking for IT support? Then you've got to contact our partner, Neil Holm, who founded Impact Business Technology. Neil has created an amazing IT services organization based on solid engineering principles, with IT security as a core component. With over 20 years in business, Impact BT has built a client base comprised of private equity and hedge funds, along with a broad range of portfolio companies, spanning across industries including manufacturing, healthcare, supply chain, professional services, and financial services all across the globe. For the best in managed services and IT support, visit impactbt.com.
3, 2, 1.
Launch ratings.
And we're back. Please help me once again to welcome the founder of Intellistra Financial Group, Mr. Kevin D. Patrick.
Hello, everyone.
The fans are going crazy. I always say they line up, before every show and just, they have the tents outside and, they just can't wait to catch a glimpse. But we haven't told them you're on Zoom, so they'll have to see you. You have to, they might get angry. But I have to read
do a
this
stage dive.
Virtual stage dive. So I have to read this because it's impressive. It says, Kevin has led and participated in over 30 billion of international and domestic acquisitions and divestitures in the telecom, beverage, retail, energy industries, with activities including preliminary discussions of interest, purchase agreements review, valuation development, deal structuring, bid strategy, negotiation of key deal points, and business integration. Now that's a mouthful, and you're a beast in your space. I would say you're a subject matter expert. A sage. an elder.
He's like, whoa, take
Yeah.
it.
Okay,
can we
okay.
dial it back a little
All right,
bit,
slow
Ramon?
slow down. I know you went gray on me, but take us back to young Kevin and where did your fascination for money and dollars and helping come from?
Yeah, it's interesting because the fascination was about businesses itself. It was trying to understand, well, how do they work? How does the Steve Jobs make the decisions he makes? How does a Toyota decide whether or not to expand their footprint in Europe? And so there were all these different questions I just always wondered about as a kid. And there was this game, computer game, business simulation model called Business Suite Business Advantage. And this is, my God, back from the 80s, man. This is like a long time ago. But as a kid, I would.
But Kev, you got flight simulators, you got asteroids, Space Invaders, and then you have business evaluation. That's the one you picked.
Yeah,
I have to ask.
Hey, look, I'm the
what
type
computer
of kid,
was this on too?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, this was IBM 8. Was it AT?
Wow.
Well, it was an AT&T computer because I was working for in the telecom space at the time. This year when I first got my first job in telecom, and this was It was AT&T computer. AT&T computer. I mean, yeah, years ago, man.
I don't even want to know the specs of this thing.
This is like a DOS box.
DOS.
Well, it's a museum piece now,
Yeah,
obviously,
right,
but
right.
it's but
So you
yeah,
had like the
that's-
black screen with the green type. Yeah.
No, they had amber.
Amber.
Yeah, the green would have been an improvement.
So you got this simulator and the fascination with it. And what was this? I think you mentioned.
Well, they gave you they basically every game had a goal, whether it was expand market share, increase the stock price of the company, expand into new markets profitably, and each company that you would run, it would give you kind of like here's where the company is from a performance perspective. Here's some of the challenges they've had in the past. And here's what you need to do as the new CEO. You were just brought on board. So that's sort of like the premise. I'm like, okay, great. I get to play CEO. Let me see and so let me be very clear. I mean, it was always trying to figure out, what were the levers that I needed to play with in order to move the business forward. And trial and error. And pretty soon you start figuring out, okay, well, hey, if I increase my cash flow, I increase the value of my business. Well, that's interesting. Hey, if I go into this market that's overperforming and I reduce my activity in the market that's underperforming, guess what? I'm increasing value in my business. So you started to see, it just started to all come together, right? And so it was just an interesting thing to learn. It was, in addition to going to college, in addition to work or whatever else you were doing, that foundation kind of helped you to understand a little bit better how business actually works.
Yeah. As a kid, did you have any businesses like selling newspaper or like hustling anything?
Always hustling. Didn't know that hustling was a business, but it was just kind of like second nature. You're always like, coming up with some way to, hey, look, I'm going to sell these speakers, and then I'm going to go down to Delancey Street in New York, and I'm going to get some more speakers, So that was the hustle, right? And by the way, I got to tell you a quick story about my Uncle Miriam, who always taught me business. My Uncle Miriam grew up it was in Harlem, actually, in Manhattan. And he always taught me about money. And I was going in for a pair of jeans one day, and Uncle Miriam said, look, we're going to negotiate for the jeans. I said, Uncle Miriam, I don't have any money. He goes, look, here's $20. Okay, gave me $20. I go in for the jeans. He goes, you tell the guy all you have is $10. So I go in, tell the guy all I have is $10. And I know I got 20 in my pocket. And Uncle Miriam says, yeah, good. Just tell me, and you'll get the jeans for $10. So the guy takes out the jeans. He gives me the jeans. And to pay for the jeans, I take out the $20 by accident.
Oh, no.
Uncle Miriam, he just stares at me like, you had it working. He was going to give it to you for 10. What are you doing? You never let him see your wallet. You never take the cash.
Valuable life lessons.
But it's just stuff like that. And the funny thing is, with regard going back to the game, when I wound up going to Wharton for my EDP, it was interesting because Wharton runs business simulations, right? And part of the EDP program, what you're doing there is you are basically in a group with a bunch of other people from around the world. You have teams of about 7 people, and you have to work together as a team to grow that business. And every business has a different aspect of what they're focusing on as part of this large Wharton simulation that they're doing at the EDP program. Well, interestingly enough, the person that was running the business simulation, this is a real computerized simulation, all that type of stuff, and you run through so many years and you should see your performance. The person running that simulation was the person that designed the Business Week Business Advantage game.
No way.
Yeah. And I told him, I went up to him, I said, you know, as a kid, I used to play that game. He goes, yeah, I designed. I said, I know. I saw that you designed, because it was in his bio. And I said, I just have to tell you that game formed me, man.
Wow.
I was obsessed with it.
Wow.
That was just interesting,
That's
man.
a great. I wouldn't chalk that up as a coincidence. It's like you felt like I'm meant to be in this room because here I am meeting this guy. So, how soon after that were you involved in your startup that you're famous for in Black Enterprise?
Oh, well, let's see. I had done how many years? About 10 years, I want to say, in telecom, and then I moved over to the spirits industry. Another quick story. In telecom, I did a bunch of transactions. In the alcohol spirits industry, my first week on the job, I was involved with the largest transaction in the history of the spirits industry. Seagram's transaction, $7.2 billion.
Wow.
Brands from all over the world. And I'm talking, you guys want to talk late nights? I never left the office. I built we had about, let's see, Seagram's had, I want to say 60 brands or 70 brands, something ridiculous. Each brand had its own valuation model. All right. Valuation model was complex. It was, your P&L, your balance sheet, your cash flow statement. Then you've got your valuation under that, right? And you had different assumptions, again, for every brand. So imagine 60 or 70 of those all rolling up to a big summary that says, okay, here's what we're going to pay for this company in total. Okay. And then, of course, when you're doing deals, some brands fall out. Some brands, you have a different strategy that says, hey, I'm going to take this brand and I'm going to sell it to a crosstown rival. Okay. So all of those elements are coming into play. But getting back to your question, it's just over a period of time. Yeah. I guess when I was in Black Enterprise, it was when I was first, I want to say it was probably within the first 6 months of when I was at Brown-Forman. And that's when I said, here, I'm running around New York City trying to start this business called StarCast. I had this concept of these video cabinets that were going to do advertising throughout the tri-state area. I had it synced in with the basically how the railroad system worked, Metro North, and going all the way down to DC. How we were going to have these things set up, and the whole plan was at that point in time, hey, look, raise money, build this network. And as you know, I think it's Metcalfe's law that the value of a network increases exponentially based on the number of nodes attached to it. So once I understood that conceptually, I said, well, build the network in this space and time. That's how you increase value, right? And I came so close before the internet sort of crashed.
Right, right. 2000, 2000 was like the height of the bubble.
Yeah.
You're like in the .com boom, like truly here.
And keep in mind, guys, I was walking around, driving around Manhattan. I was meeting with BBDO, which was one of the largest marketing firms.
Ad agency, one of the most well-known.
And they basically said outright, hey, this is something, once you build it, we are just going to buy it from you. And I remember I had my fraternity brother with me, Ben Rosa. He was in the room with me when they said that. And we just both looked at each other and our jaws just kind of dropped. They're going to buy us? No, we're just two young guys trying to figure out, hey, man, this is the game and we got to get in it. And it was the height of the .com bubble, and then everything fell apart.
Yeah,
I mean,
for
dude, it's like 20 some odd years ago, man. 25.
Yeah, I'm looking at it here. I got the article. So for those listening, it was the August 2000 edition. the 30th anniversary spectacular, actually, of Black Enterprise, and your article here, putting a new face on outdoor ads. I'm just going to hold it up to the to our camera here. Those listening, check it out. I'm sure you can find it. We've got a physical copy here, but quite the accomplishment. And I recognize a lot of these alpha men in the article as well. Many of my personal heroes are in here, and you even shouted out Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity in the article.
Had to.
We have to. But yeah, this is when you were handling mergers and acquisitions for Citizens in Stanford at the time, and you were, for our listeners, it's like you were working the corporate job, but you guys were plotting, a startup during the .com era, which is quite.
And keep in mind that as I was in Citizens, I had left Citizens, and there was this interim space where I was now at Brown-Forman, and I had to continue. And I'm doing deals for Brown-Forman, flying back from Louisville, Kentucky, back to Connecticut, New York City, actually to do a deal for them. And I had to, on the side, hey, I got to meet with these 3 firms for StarCast to see if we can get this thing going before this internet bubble pops.
Yeah, there goes an alpha man. I mean, that's a great example of if you want, you have to do extraordinary things if you want extraordinary results. The jet setting and the flying and the deals but still managing these corporate responsibilities is quite impressive. So we won't chalk it up as a failure. It's a first attempt in learning. How did you move on from that? What lessons did you take from that into your next opportunity?
Well, I was actually kind of bummed out about not getting StarCast to go, but understood that the environment I was operating in from an internet perspective, again, the bubble popped. Mm-hmm. And I was still doing transactions. So from my mindset, it was, let's learn as much as we can about deal space. Let's learn as much as we can about what it takes to do a transaction. And again, I'm doing multi-billion-dollar transactions in liquor, spirits, and I'm in the room with some pretty impressive men. And we all have to realize that as well. When you are fortunate enough to be in the room, I call it, right, with people that have gone through some of the best schools in the country, some of the best schools in the world, that have done transactions all over the world. I mean, it's okay to learn. It's okay to sit in that room and absorb. You don't have to be the star because these guys had been there, done that, and just listen to them. Listen to how they talk to one another. Listen to how they interplay with one another. And you can understand that, wow, okay, this is how you build not only a business, a brand, but also relationships that will allow you to forge forward with your organization and your company. I took that as an opportunity for me to learn and me to apply that. I said, someday in the future, I'm going to have another StarCast or another Blackwater or another in Telestra, and I'm going to jump with everything that I've learned, and I'm going to use that to grow these businesses. That's where I want to be in the long run. So that's what I took from it.
That's a great gem, because I think a lot of us think that when you get the opportunity to be in that room, that you have to somehow perform or say something profound. But I think the concept of once you're in that room, absorbing and learning, as they say, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
You're in the wrong room. You're in the wrong room.
I have to ask too, just when you get to the point where you're talking about billions with a B, does that change the amount of pressure that is associated with making those level of deals? Or at the end of the day, once you hit a certain experience level, do you just feel that it's all just numbers ultimately, whether it's millions or billions? Or does that ultimately say, okay, we have to handle this differently because of the sheer scale and volume of this?
Well, again, in dealing with, looking at deals, whether it's a B or an M or just a K, right? From the perspective of money, my job and the way I've always looked at it is, let's not do anything that's going to cause me to lose value. I'll never forget what Owsley Brown, who was the chairman of Brown-Forman, told me. He said, Kevin, I never want to trade value that I could create away to someone else. And what he's saying there is, if I can create the value, whether it's a K, an M, or a B, 1,000, million, billion, my job is to create the value for me and my family and my organization. Right. I don't want to give that away. So So for me, I never looked at, well, it's $1 billion deal. Take that more seriously than $100,000 deal. In somebody's organization, that's a big number.
Right.
So I take it very seriously. And I always try to point out, if it does cost me $100,000 to do something or $50,000 to do something, or your organization to do something, well, let me show you the benefit of that. Maybe this look at it in terms of it being an investment to grow. I can, get with that. But if it's just that we did something silly and it costs us to lose money, or we're doing something silly that's costing us to be inefficient, no, I can't get with that. I've got to push back and maybe strongly suggest you not do that. And that's sort of kind of been my role in organizations from a cost management perspective as well. You got to be courageous enough to say to people that the thinking is wrong or the thinking is non sequitur. It doesn't make sense. So let us work through and refine this again. Okay. And I think that being able to do that for me, now, not all people want to hear that story. They don't already hear that, hey, we looked at your cost structure. Here's some things you're going to have to tighten. But trust me, if you get in a tough situation and you're dealing with banks, they're going to do that. So do you want to deal with it now or deal with it later?
Right. Absolutely. Now take us up to where you were right before Intellistra, because you were doing big things at Williamsburg. Yeah,
well, I was brought on board at Williamsburg as SVP, CFO, and treasurer. The Colonial Williamsburg Foundation was going, when I first got there in 2017, they were going through a very challenging time. They had $300 million in debt. They were paying about, $17 million in interest a year. They had to refinance this debt. They had poor free cash flow, which basically means they were sucking wind and cash. They had 4 hotels back then. The hotels were basically capital intensive businesses that were constantly having to be remodeled, which means you were continually pulling cash out of your cash reserves and to spend for the capex. Colonial Williamsburg also had a $1 billion or so endowment. Actually, a $700 million endowment, call it $1 billion, clean math, $1 billion endowment. Endowment was throwing off somewhere around 8% a year in terms of returns. That's great. But again, your debt is costing you about 7% a year. Okay, so that margin's only about 1%. Not an optimal place to be. And if you have to spend more cash on you running your operations, again, because of hospitality, because you also had the nonprofit business, which was also costing you, it becomes a very challenging scenario. So I was brought in basically to help turn them around. First thing I did was focus on we got to refinance the debt. I was told. I met with board members who said, "Hey, that's the first thing you got to do." So guess what? That's the first thing I did. Refinance the debt. Secondly, looked at getting everyone's mind around how do we improve operationally our EBITDA and ultimately our free cash flow. And just for your listeners, EBITDA is basically a cash-based metric that allows us to see how we're doing from a growth profitability
and
perspective.
As an acronym, just kind of spell it out for those folks.
Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. There's another metric called free cash flow, which is you take your EBITDA and you subtract out CapEx. What's left is free cash flow, but the other thing you have to pull out of that is your interest expense, right? So that all nets out to something called free cash flow. And what you want to do is be in a position where you have free cash flow that's growing, because at the end of the day, that represents cash available to you to use.
Right.
Okay. So that's very important. So one of the focuses at Colonial Williamsburg was not only teaching people that and showing people that, but also explaining to people that that's kind of the new way forward. Right. And getting folks in that space, which happens to be a nonprofit predominantly, although they have for-profit businesses, to get them to understand that and then think in terms of, I've got a department, my department has an EBITDA target. Our job is to hit that EBITDA target because that helps sustain the organization. The minute we're spending more in your department for your department than we had to. That's actually costing the enterprise money. It's costing, it's becoming a challenge for us. And that means we have to work extra hard to get funding from donors. And like I said before, I mentioned to you before, Ramon, donors at some point get tired of always giving money. You know, in their mind, it's not, if they're just going to give money away, well, why am I giving it just to you? You know, I can give it someplace else and maybe they had better efficacy in terms of what they're doing than you, CW.
Right. And your causes change. You know, the causes you might be supporting one year to the next.
Exactly. Exactly.
Did you get a lot of pushback when you've got to tell departments, you know, you've got to,
yeah.
What's that conversation?
Well, I got very clever about it because I would tell them where they needed to be as a department. And, you know, of course I get, you know, well, we need to do this. We've been doing it for years this way. And if you don't do it, donors are going to be upset. And so I pushed back a little bit and I said, well, look, I tell you what, I will work with you to come up with a better solution, but you're going to lead it. You're going to find a better solution that accommodates giving me the EBITDA that I need to make sure your department doesn't have to face further cuts. So I'll work with you on it, but it's not on me to figure out that by myself. You're a department, you're running a $1 million, $2 million department. Why aren't you coming up with this? I mean, again, in the for-profit world, this wouldn't even be a discussion. You would come up with that because you understood in the for-profit world that your boss is going to demand that of you.
Right. And when you, I do want to, how do you quantify when you restructured the debt? I think it was quite the number that you were able to save them just by restructuring it was pretty high.
Yeah, we were able to restructure it because we went and shopped. You know, the debt was coming due. Mm-hmm. We shopped it around, and that takes a hell of an effort. You got to meet with the bankers, talk to them. Bankers have to have confidence in your plan. So when I sit down with bankers and I tell them that we're cutting costs, and I show them this is where we're cutting the costs, we're going to be able to afford the debt level. We're not going to leave you guys hanging dry. We're going to be able to pay this debt back. So please refinance this debt and lower our interest rate, or extend the debt, or change the format of the debt. So maybe it's a 10-year bullet or a 7-year bullet that allows us to pay the principal 7-10 years out. But it's that restructuring that allows us to save cash flow, right? Mm-hmm. Improve our cash flow situation, and allows us to have funding that we need to, again, grow the business, and it ultimately makes us more sustainable in the future. That's the whole goal. Now, banks will get tricky if they start looking at your financials and see that your free cash flow, EBITDA, what have you, is heading in the wrong direction. No one wants to finance that. They're going to push back and say, well, why am I giving money to you when there's a risk that, I'm going to have a challenge? Also, keep in mind that depending on the quality of your debt rating, a bank may have to keep more cash on hand as a result of you being a more risky entity. They may have to keep more reserves on hand because they're required to by certain regulations. So that becomes a challenge. A bank may not want to do a deal with you because they don't want that pain. So, I mean, you got to weigh all of that. But ultimately, it's about the relationship with the banks at that point that makes it work. If you can show as a CFO and a treasurer that, hey, you're a person of your word, and you made the cuts you said you were going to make, and we're seeing the improvement in your free cash flow EBITDA. Hey, you're a pretty solid player in their eyes, and so they're going to want to work with you.
Awesome. Now, I mean, we can do it part 2 where we go into some of these other big accomplishments that you have, and folks can download the PDF at Intellistra.com. And what you've been sharing is your role there at Williamsburg as a senior vice president, CFO, treasurer. I mean, it sounds like you did amazing work while you were there. But I want to get to Intellistra, the birth of it, the brainchild of it, what your thought process was, because many folks out there are spending careers in corporate, and they dream of having their own business, but for many it is. And for you, it certainly was. And I just want to talk a little bit about the nucleus that kind of sparked it, and then tell our listeners all about it, and finally how they can get a hold of you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, for me, the nucleus. Well, I mean, I've always had the bug in me, going back to the Starcast days. Uh, Going back to the days where I'm looking at how businesses actually business simulations, how businesses work. So I've always had that bug in me. So for me, it was, I just wanted to have that as a legacy, that I created this thing that I could pass through the next generation. Maybe it's my own version of wealth creation for my family and friends, that I created this business that someday is going to certainly create opportunities for other folks. So that's been a big part of it. But I've never lost interest in having something. Now, Intellistra, from how that came into being, I knew that I wanted to do something that took my existing expertise in acquisitions and also in private equity. I knew I wanted to take all this stuff I've learned. And when you think about it, Ramon, over the course of your history, over the course of your career, you learn so much stuff. And the question, well, what do I do with all this now? I mean, if you just, are you supposed to go into retirement and just don't use any of this stuff, or just put it? Do you write a book? I mean, somebody, maybe they read it years later. I don't know. But in my mind, I said, I'm still an active guy, and there's still stuff I want to do. And how can I use all this stuff I've done and learned? And I think when I play it back in my mind, I mean, to beat my own drum a little bit, I've done some pretty incredible stuff. I've been in rooms where most people say, well, how the hell did you get in that room? I'm like, I don't know. I just wound up in there, And part of it is, well, okay, if you had the opportunity to be in this room and learn from this person and, spend time with that person. And by the way, when I talk about who's in the room, there are examples, certainly at Colonial Williamsburg, when I'm in the room with Supreme Court justices, because they're on our board. Carly Fiorina, who's our chair, she was on our board. Sheldon Stone, who runs Oak Street Capital, a multi-billion-dollar the financing outfit. And I'm in the room with these gentlemen and gentleladies, learning from these people and hearing them, how they address problems. And, whether it's Owsley or Dr. Tao, who used to run Citizens down in Stamford, Connecticut, I'm in the room with these folks.
Yeah.
And by the way, and these are pretty sharp people.
And you remain teachable throughout this. There's a certain level of humility where you have to remain teachable in these circumstances.
Absolutely. And, when I look at the spectrum of my life, it's, again, I feel like they've all added a piece to my molecular structure here as a businessman. And so my deal is, hey, man, I've got this bound of information, this bounty of information and capability, and I want to put it someplace. And this entity called Intellistra is what came to fold, where I said, this is where I want to put it. And I want to pull people around me that have that same drive and desire. Just to go back, some of the people I've worked with, I mean, and that's the other thing, being a good boss, right? Being a good boss in terms of bringing talent in around you that shares conceptually what you're about, right? So the best folks I've ever worked with, the best folks I've ever had as employees are the folks that were in a room late at night eating Chinese food, and someone asked a question, and we're looking at the whiteboard saying, yeah, how does that work? And we're each taking a marker out, working the whiteboard to solve a problem. And those are the type of rooms and spaces I've been in, whether it's building an algorithm at Brown-Forman, where I was figuring out how to allocate $300 million in brand spending, working with Owsley, the chairman of Brown-Forman, in a room with about 3 other people sketching this stuff out. To me, that's always been cool stuff, man. And working with people that get that. It's about the idea. It's about building on the idea. That's the cool part, right? And that's the part that really pushes my go button. And so when I looked at Intellistra, this is what I'm trying to build with Intellistra, pulling that talent in and solving these complex problems that either people don't want to solve for a small organization or
don't know how.
Or don't know how. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're, reading your copy here on Intellistra and just the transformative potential of technology, because you're also interweaving. There's finance know-how, but there's also data that you're utilizing, and you're building these custom algorithms. I think all of this with the goal of unlocking these opportunities and helping. You're paying it forward using everything you've all the knowledge you've acquired and your expertise to pay it forward, so that these organizations can actually fulfill their missions even better.
Exactly. And again, some of them don't have the ability to spend the millions of dollars or several $100,000 at least to bring in either the talent or the consulting space, or go to McKinsey or Bain or BCG. They're not going to do it. Well, guess what? You got a group of folks that think the way those other big guys do. Mm-hmm. And guess what? They can apply their knowledge to help your business grow. And that's what IntelliSure is about. It's kind of democratizing the space, so to speak, right? Giving even the small players an opportunity to grow and create value and sustain themselves over the next few years.
And what size organization would you say is ideal?
I'll work with. I'm looking for organizations with IntelliSure that have already, for nonprofits, that already have a 990. In other words, I don't want to go much smaller than an organization that does not have to file a 990 every year. And I forgot what the criteria is, but you have to be a nonprofit that generates so many millions of dollars in order to form a 990. For the for-profit business, I'm looking for businesses that are interested that they certainly they've taken their lifted their organization to a growth space. And I got to say, from a enterprise value, somewhere around $1 million, maybe $2 million. But I'll consider pretty much any organization. I'll talk to any organization to see what's going on, and I'll advise them. But it may not be the right opportunity for them to work with us at this space until they really get their business growing.
Right. And then how can folks that are interested in learning more find out, or if someone wants to actually book some time with you and your team, how do they do it?
Go to IntelliSure.com. There's a brief questionnaire in the back, not even a questionnaire, just kind of the information space where you just fill it in and reach out to me. I'll make sure to call you back. And again, it's not about locking you in for anything, but just try to explore whether or not it makes sense for us to have a discussion and see where we can help you.
Absolutely. And you've been very prolific on LinkedIn lately, so I give you some props for that. And we look forward to having you back on. Hopefully in person, in studio. We'll get the black car to come get you.
I look forward to it.
All right, my man. Thank you, Kevin. You still remain one of my personal life heroes, one of those alpha men that made a profound impact on my life, and I'm very grateful that we reconnected and that you're here, gracing our show with your presence and sharing all this valuable industry knowledge that's sure to help so many more people.
I appreciate it, Ramon, and thank you, man, for reaching out, man. Your organization is fantastic, and you guys have done an incredible job, so I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for trusting us and our team with launching your brand. Awesome. Kevin, thank you. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mission Control. Until next time, this is your host, Ramon Peralta with Peralta Design, and we launch brands.